Welcome to Inside Politics with Kevin Klein, beyond the headlines, beyond the spin. Straight facts, sharp analysis, and common sense conversation you won't hear anywhere else. Let's get started.
Hi, I'm Kevin Klein. Welcome to another edition of Inside Politics. Today I'm joined by my two colleagues from the Winnipeg Sun, Royce Koop, who is also a professor of political sciences at the University of Manitoba, and former radio host Jeff Currier, who is also a columnist with us at the Winnipeg Sun. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me. We have to get right into it. Now that the election has come and gone, the Liberals lost one more seat to the Bloc, and now we're hearing all kinds of announcements. We're seeing messages from premiers. Let's kick it off with Mark Carney. Hasn't named his cabinet yet, but has announced that he's going down to meet with President Donald Trump in the coming days.
Well, we'll see. We'll see how good his negotiating skills are. There are kind of distant connections between Mark Carney's former company, Brookfield, and members of the Trump sphere. So it's not as though these guys are complete and utter strangers to one another. So we'll see how well they can get along. I think, when you're talking to Donald Trump, it's impossible to predict how any conversation is going to go, or how any kind of negotiation is going to play out. Here's hoping.
Well, I guess time will tell. Royce, what do you think?
Well, in the election campaign, there were lots of people who voted for the Liberal Party. They were elbows up Liberals who expected Mark Carney to fight with the Americans and represent Canada's interests in that way. And then the day after the election, Donald Trump gave a press conference saying he was delighted with the outcome. He thought that PierrePaulv hated him. He was happy to see Pierre go down in flames. And so I kind of wonder about how a lot of these Liberal voters would react to that. It just demonstrates what Jeff said, trying to act in response to Trump. It can sometimes just be a fool's game. He changes his mind. It's not clear what he's going to think tomorrow. I think the only thing that is clear is that there was a kind of a clear case of foreign interference in our election campaign. The Americans impacted the outcome. I'm pretty unhappy about that, to be honest. And for no apparent reason, where it's not clear. It's not even clear what he got out of it, that he got his preferred candidate elected in our election.
Well, and I saw a tweet, on X, a post on X from a former ambassador warning Carney not to pay too much attention to Trump, to pay attention to the American people. That's who he should really be negotiating with, because he highlighted what we've talked about before. Trump doesn't have that much more time. He has a couple of years really left before he's a lame duck president anyways, but he might lose the House and the Senate in another year. So there really isn't that much time. And you can see that he's backing off a lot of his tariffs. My problem is that he's backed off a lot of his, but I've been talking to some business executives across the country because I wanted to find out how the Canadian tariffs were impacting them. And they're finding that the tariffs that Canada has put on products coming in from the U.S. is hurting them more than the talk of tariffs from the United States. Are you hearing that, Jeff?
Yeah, which makes perfect sense. I mean, as soon as you put a tariff on any kind of good, the price is going to go up for the business or the consumers. I think that the whole thing I've found about this whole business about tariffs, which Trump initiated, is that he either doesn't understand or he does understand and is working under the assumption that his followers don't understand, is that North America is no longer in a retail-based economy. We're now in a much more service-based economy. And he doesn't seem to grasp the exchange of services and technological performances and intellectual properties that go back and forth across the border. All he sees is aluminum or steel or lumber. And our economy is much more nuanced, it's much more complex than it was in the 1950s. If he thinks he's going to take America back to the 1950s, I mean, people are absolutely delusional if he thinks he's going to be bringing those manufacturing jobs back.
I saw a post.
First of all, you're not going to do it. No. And the other thing is that so many manufacturing jobs now are robotic run. They're automated. So you're not going to create a lot of jobs anyway. So he either doesn't understand that, or he's banking on his followers not understanding.
Well, I saw a post on X from one of his cabinet talking about how all these manufacturing jobs are going to be coming back to the United States, and he can't wait until Americans are making 100 grand or 150 grand a year. And I was thinking, I don't see Apple bringing back factory jobs and paying somebody 150 grand a year, because now the Apple iPhone will cost over $30,000 if you do that. So I just
Yeah.
I think you're right in some ways, Jeff. But is Carney is Carney reacting to this, or do you think that they kind of had this planned out, Royce? And I don't want to start a conspiracy theory, but I'm talking about there is some connections, as Jeff said, between Carney's old company and Jared Kushner and Elon Musk. That was talked
Yeah.
about for the longest time. He never brought it up, of course, because it was meaningless to the mainstream media and especially the CBC. But it almost seems like money knows money.
Yeah, and we had a very short election campaign. Carney was prime minister for a couple of weeks, and he called an election, the shortest possible election campaign, in order to benefit him. We don't actually know him that well, and these sorts of stories only coming out and now that the election's over. I think that it's his job. He should certainly be speaking to Trump. He should be fighting for our interests. He should do that. But I think that the ambassador that you quoted is correct, and you've said the same thing, Kevin. Like, Trump is effectively on the way out. He changes his mind on tariffs. He won't be around forever. There's good reason to expect that the Republican Party would go back into a kind of free trade orientation after Trump is gone. And so, yeah, we should respond to Trump, but we shouldn't. We shouldn't remake the country, remake the economy in response to what could be very fleeting threats. And there are some downsides to this. We know in Manitoba, just a few days ago, the government announced $962 million in support for businesses, for workers that they think are affected by tariffs. That's money that the province cannot afford to be spending on a brand new expenditure. And so there are real consequences to tariffs on our side as well.
But Wab Kinew, the premier of Manitoba, I mean, was one of the only premiers to come out immediately and thank Carney. It was he was giddy about the whole thing that Carney had won, and I guess that's the transfer payments. But you had premiers come out like Danielle Smith and Scott Moe that, yes, said congratulations, but also made it very clear that they want to see change, that he needs to reach out to Western Canada. And we know now that Premier Smith has changed the legislation to allow for a separation vote, if you will. They only require 177,000 verified signatures. And the word today is that they have over 77,000 verified signatures. Scott Moe is, been asked if he's going to join that. And he keeps saying, I will fight for the people of Saskatchewan. I can really see, Wab Kinew has to step back here for a second and say, well, hang on a sec. I can't be going further and further in depth because if Alberta and Saskatchewan leave, so too do all the transfer payments, because that's where the money comes from. So is Kinew overreacting, or is he following the path of the Liberals, and are Smith and Moe doing the right thing by, yes, congratulating the Prime Minister, but saying you have a very small window of time here to make this right?
Yeah, I can get Royce's thoughts on this, but the message from Saskatchewan and Alberta is that Canada doesn't work very well for us right now. That the Canadian and we've been hearing that from Quebec for decades, of course. So we're talking about a very difficult kind of scenario because of the diversity in the regions of this country. Does Canada still work as a federation? And it's a kind of a fundamental question. I don't expect Alberta to separate. I don't expect Saskatchewan to separate. But there's clearly enough level of discontent there that we need to re-examine just how effective Confederation is for some provinces, especially a province like Alberta, which provides so much of the income for the rest of the country. And now we have a prime minister who is very much a leave the oil in the ground guy, very much keep all the minerals in the ground, big on environmental policies. I know that he's done away with the consumer portion of the carbon tax, but that doesn't mean we're going to be off the hook by any means. Get ready, folks, because we're going to get nailed one way or the other. May not show up at the gas pump, but it's going to show up. So I think Alberta's got some legitimate concerns. They've been looked down upon by so much of the country for so long and resented, and yet, they've been the fuel, no pun intended, that has been driving this country to a great extent.
Well, let me just play this clip real quickly of the leader of the bloc.
And we will have to remain the barrier not to be crossed, protecting French language and secularity of the state in Quebec, and a different model in immigration, which has to be successful, and the fact that there's no future for oil and gas, at least in Quebec and probably everywhere. And this has to be said and protected. I have a brand new weapon to do that. Mr. Bonin will be extraordinary carrying that message.
So obviously, in this clip, he is making it very clear that oil and gas is not something Quebec wants to be a part of. They're not going to allow the pipeline. He also made it very clear that he has the strongest weapon, because I guess he holds the balance of power. Now, we heard Mark Carney's not going to, sign a deal with the NDP, but that doesn't mean he's not going to make 3 or 4 of them a cabinet minister and have them walk across the floor. I could see that happening. I could see some negotiations going on for that. But I mean, to Jeff's point, why wouldn't you if you're Alberta and Saskatchewan? Because Saskatchewan's getting beat up by the tariffs with China. Farmers are taking a beating because of that. Carney's not even mentioning that at all. It's like it doesn't even exist. Yeah. And then you've got the guy in Quebec just making comments like that. Why wouldn't they want to leave? Why wouldn't they want? Why would you want to stay?
First of all, Blanchet is not the prime minister. And if Mark Carney really wants to build pipelines, if he wants to overrule, this opposition in Quebec, he can turn to the Conservatives for support in doing so. The Conservatives and the Liberals have more than enough votes to pass legislation in the House. And so these are empty threats. The question is whether or not Mark Carney is actually willing to contradict Quebecers on these issues. And whatever he says about resource development, I don't think he is. I would be delighted to be proven wrong, but I just can't imagine that happening. On Alberta, Jeff is right. There are real problems with this federation, with the way it functions, and we owe it to our neighbors to address those and to think clearly about those things. I don't think that ultimately separation is Alberta's separation. I can't see it happening, but it's a good thing for the Premier of Alberta to raise these concerns and to make sure that they're kind of top of mind in this country. The one thing I'd say to Albertans is, if you feel like Canadians are not responsive to these concerns, we re-elected a Liberal government even after a decade of failure on these pipeline issues on resource development. Well, the truth is that the results in Ontario, they surprised me. The Conservatives did very well in Ontario. Pierre Poilievre outperformed all the polls. He did fantastic, not as well as in Quebec, but actually not that bad in Quebec. This country is not as regionally fractured as it was in the past. And it seems to me that there are a lot more Canadians that are open to these arguments than was the case in the past. I wouldn't see these results as a kind of rebuke of Alberta's interests or concerns.
Well, I think, Kevin, if I could just jump in here real quick. I think in terms of passing legislation, I don't think Carney's going to have a huge issue. He only needs, a couple of block abstentions and a couple of NDP votes, and he's there. I don't think he's going to have to offer cabinet positions to anybody in the NDP. All he needs is a couple of votes. He's got to just tweak a piece of legislation enough to keep them happy. And hey, let's face it, the NDP is going to be in no humor to trigger another election. These guys, they have no members, they have no money, they've been wiped out, they have no leader. They don't want an election anytime soon. They're going to support whatever legislation Mark Carney puts out there.
So what happens now with Pierre Poilievre? Because you did talk about how well the Conservatives performed in Ontario. They performed very well. I think they got more votes than Doug Ford got. So that's interesting after what he did and his crew, Corey and such. Um, I heard today that there is an MP in Alberta who's going to give up his seat to allow Pierre Poilievre to run in Alberta. I think that's great. I think that signals a little bit more of a potential divide in the country, if you will. Maybe, it kind of sets the stage for that. But how quickly do you think Carney will call the by-election? I mean, this is a test of true leadership. Does he want 6 months without Poilievre in the house so he can do what he wants and not be held under the microscope, or does he do the right thing and say, look, this is your leader. He got an awful lot of the popular vote, only a few percentage points apart. I'm going to call the by-election right away.
Well, he said he's going to do it right away. He said in his press
Okay.
conference today he's not going to play any games. He's going to do it right away, which is good and it's admirable.
Yep.
But let's not forget that Carney, he basically abused his powers as prime minister to call an election outside of the fixed date and to have it as short as possible to benefit himself. I'm glad to see that he's using his powers in a way that is good for Canadian democracy. It hasn't always been the case.
Do you think if the election was
Okay,
longer, it would have been a different result, Royce? Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, absolutely. People even on the CBC were saying that if there had even just been one more week, the results might have flipped. We know that he called a short election campaign because he thought it would benefit him. He was trying to exploit the advantage that he had related to Trump and tariffs. That was clearly the motive for that, and that's his right. He can do that. He can request a dissolution, but my hope is that prime ministers use their powers in a way to help Canadian democracy, not always to help themselves.
yeah.
And
Doesn't
that
doesn't
was
Pierre,
not the case here.
sorry, Royce, doesn't Pierre Poilievre have to accept some responsibility for this though? Because after Justin Trudeau left, which was his biggest weapon, and the carbon tax at the consumer level was reduced to zero, Poilievre just didn't seem to be able to pivot to come up with something else that engaged voters. He's perceived as an angry guy, and rightly or wrongly, Pierre Poilievre is seen as an angry guy. He's seen as Trump 2.0 or the Canadian version of Trump, and he wasn't able to change that perception among Canadian voters. And I guess Mark Carney is, if you look at his economic policies, there's very little difference between what Justin Trudeau is doing and what Mark Carney is going to do, because after all, Carney was advising Trudeau for the last several months of his tenure as prime minister. So their economic philosophies are the same, which is, Royce has pointed out, has been disastrous for Canada. But Pierre Poilievre somehow wasn't able to say to folks, look, Mark Carney may look different, but he's exactly the same as Justin Trudeau. Let's get our focus back where it was, which is on the Canadian economy, affordability. Don't worry, we'll deal with Donald Trump when the time comes. But the whole Trump spectrum, that really was the election issue. That's what decided it for a lot of people. I think it was that.
Yeah.
It was the Donald Trump thing, and that Mark Carney was able to portray himself as the guy who would be able to deal with Trump. And Pierre Poilievre just looked too angry for a lot of voters, particularly female voters.
Yeah, I disagree with that. I mean, yes, I agree that people thought he was too angry, but I blame that on the CBC. The CBC during this election was embarrassing. They wore liberal colors on their sleeve. They didn't hide it. They did everything they could, along with, other mainstream media that tried to paint Pierre Poilievre and associate him with Donald Trump. When the reality was, if you listen to his speeches, you listen to some of the policies he put forward, especially the policy on domestic violence and stuff, things that liberals wouldn't have done, they won't do. But he put together and put forward, I think, some good policies. And as someone who was a member of, a provincial conservative party, I don't put a lot of the blame on Poilievre. I put it on the people in the back room, the people running his campaign, the ones that are hired, the hired guns and such like that. That sometimes they don't take the moment to step back. They think they're on the right path. This is their strategy. They're going to win, and they have to be able to, as you said, Jeff, pivot. And we saw that in the Manitoba election. Big mistakes made by those running the campaign, and big mistakes being made even afterwards. So, is it Poilievre's fault? I guess he takes a little bit of the blame because he's a leader. He could have forced that. But on the other hand, you're paying a lot of experts and a lot of people who make a lot of money off elections to give you this advice, and then you've got the media against you. But did you see him as negative, Royce? I don't see him as angry.
Pierre Poilievre was the leader. He was in Parliament for 20 years. I mean, he understands politics. He ought to be able to say, "Look, folks, this is, and it was his image. It was his pounding on the desk, and it was his image over the last 20 years. I mean, this image of Pierre Poilievre wasn't created during a 3-week election campaign. It was created over 20 years in Parliament."
But 6 months ago, people wanted that. They wanted that image. They wanted that.
They wanted Justin Trudeau gone, and they wanted the carbon tax gone.
Yeah, I wrote about this in my column in the Sun tomorrow on Saturday. But it's kind of an old problem, moving from being an opposition leader, where you have to be a prosecutor and you have to be critical of the government, and that is a role that Poilievre was very good in. Maybe a little too good. And then moving into an election campaign where you have to be positive and sell yourself and present yourself. That's a hard pivot to make. I don't think he failed at that. I do think the coverage was pretty negative and pretty unfair a lot of the time. And there is a very interesting historical parallel, which is Stephen Harper in 2004. He had exactly the same kind of perception problems. He was distant, he was cold. And after he lost to the 2004 election, the party kept him on. And what happened? The Canadians got to know him a little bit more. There was a real effort to soften his image. You probably remember he would he started to wear his light blue sweaters. They talked about his cats. He loves cats. There were videos of him goofing around with his kids. And that it's kind of easy to deal with these issues if you put a little bit of effort into it, and if you have a chance, if you have time to do it. And so it looks like with this by-election, the party is kind of making a collective decision. They are going to hold on to him, and I think that's the right decision. These sorts of issues, as Harper demonstrated, they're easy to deal with. And you can read personal accounts of Poilievre. He's not a mean person. He's not an abrasive person. He has an interesting personal story. He's a very caring, doting father and husband. I'm not too worried about these issues.
So what happens next with the Liberal government? Carney is going to announce his cabinet. I don't suspect we'll have many changes there. What has to happen in the first 100 days to bring this country back together, Royce?
Well, the problem is that now Carney, he can't govern without the support of another party, and probably that party is going to be the NDP rump, and it's going to make it very hard for Carney to do anything that Justin Trudeau wasn't doing. Is he going to cut spending?
Nothing changes.
Yeah, nothing changes. Is he going to cut spending? Probably not. Is he going to reduce the deficit? Probably not. And he can't do that with the NDP voting to allow his government to survive. And so what happens? All of the problems that afflicted Justin Trudeau, all the things that made him unpopular, apart from kind of personal things, people just kind of got tired of him as a person, fair enough. But all the big policy concerns, inflation, cost of living, home prices, those are just going to go on and on. And Carney might, very similarly to the Prime Minister of the UK, Keir Starmer, his popularity might drop like a stone very quickly. I don't see how he avoids that, given the configuration of Parliament, to be honest.
Well, interesting, though, that that Carney put his platform out soon enough that Canadians had a chance to look at it, and they decided to vote for it, at least in sufficient numbers. One of the mistakes Poilievre made is that he waited so long to release his platform that 30% of the Canadian electorate had already cast their ballots by the time he dropped his platform. It was just a colossal strategic blunder on the Conservatives' part to wait that long. They missed a huge opportunity to sell their platform to 30% of the electorate who voted in the advanced polls.
How long do you think this government will stand? I mean, I wrote a column. My gut is telling me I don't think it'll last more than a year. I think that it'll fall, depending, I guess, on what Carney does over the next little while. But I think more and more people are going to get educated on the fact that if Alberta and Saskatchewan continue to rattle the cages a little bit and threaten to leave, that there could be an economic disaster for Canada. So how long does this government truly stand? How long does he have as Prime Minister?
I think a couple of years. And the reason I say that is I just don't see the NDP as being prepared to cause another election anytime soon.
But are they going to be the NDP? I mean, is this where they just join with the Liberals and just
No, I don't think so. No, the NDP is a long-standing brand in Canada, and I think they'll, we've seen political parties almost decimated before. I mean, it's happened to both the Liberals and the Conservatives at various times, and they have enough of a brand that they will rebound. I don't know if the NDP is ever going to be the power or the force that it once was, but I don't see them wanting to trigger an election anytime soon. And as long as the NDP, even those seven or whatever it is, 7 MPs support the government, or you get a couple of block abstentions, I remember most of these people want to stay in Parliament for a while. And nobody wants. Yeah, that's right. It's a pretty good gig economically.
Yeah.
And
you don't have to do much. Just sit there.
Well, yeah, certainly. And now, the NDP's got a big problem, of course, because they no longer have official party status. So there's a whole lot of ramifications that come with it, like disadvantages, financial disadvantages and resources and so forth, but that come with that. And your ability to, your question period time and all that sort of thing for the 6 people in Canada who watch question period. But I think it's in their best interest to not.
You think Carney might give it to them? I mean, if he wants them to, he wants them to prop them up, you got to give them party status, right?
Right. Yeah. I don't know, Royce. What do you think? I think it'll go a couple of years.
Yeah, maybe 2 years. At the very least, the NDP has to select a leader, and so it depends on how long it takes them to do that. The NDP is an interesting party right now. I mean, the caucus now it has some of the the real ideological hardliners, and also people that can see what the kind of wishy-washy negotiating style of Jagmeet Singh ultimately got them. Just knocked them down to 6 seats. And so I kind of wonder if a party that is more strident, more ideologically consistent, and more antagonistic is not going to be willing to go to an election. It's actually going to be willing to carry through on its threat, because that was Singh's problem, is that he talked a big game, but when it came time to defeat the government, he would always back down. And so it might be that this new NDP, it's a bit of a rump. I don't mean that to be insulting, but it might be that the new NDP is actually more willing to carry through with that threat, and that could lead to a quicker election, maybe 2 years.
The new Democratic Party, you mean? The new Democratic Party. I think the members that were elected, and I guess people can think what they want, but I think it's very, very similar, eerily similar to what you have with the NDP in Manitoba. A lot of activists that did get elected under that NDP banner. But you also have, as Jeff said, it's an older brand. It's been around for a long time. The people in the background with the party might be saying, look, you're not going to prop them up because we're not going to have that problem again. They may act fast to get a leader and start that. I don't know. I don't see 2 years, but who am I? You guys said I was wrong when I said it would be a minority government for the Liberals with the Bloc holding them up. What
you said was it was going to be a Bloc coalition.
It might be.
It's not. No, that's nonsense.
You watch. He has already set the stage by saying he holds the power, and he does.
Well, he's wrong.
But he's
wrong.
not. How?
The NDP holds the balance of power, and do you ever see, seriously, did you consider that Stephen Harper and the Bloc had a coalition going in the Conservatives minority government? You would never have called that a coalition.
No.
No. There's no way there's going to be a Bloc coalition.
But Quebec's going to get what they want. They're going to be favored in a lot of the motions. They're going to have to be, pampered a little bit. But Alberta and Saskatchewan are going to miss out on that. So eventually, we're either going to go to a system where we have a Western Canadian party, an Ontario party. We'll have a Quebec party. We'll have an Eastern Canada party. We'll have a BC party. It'll be anarchy. It's anarchy now. It's nonsense right now. But that's where we're pushing people to. But I also think a lot of people said, well, why would Alberta and Saskatchewan want to be their own country? And you got to stop. People have to stop thinking that they'll just go out on their own. They could join the states tomorrow, right? If they got that separation, they can negotiate to break away, and they can go and be a part of the U.S.
Yeah, that's a possibility. I guess. I mean, our political landscape. It's not quite like the Knesset yet, but we are fragmented. I think that's fair to say. That the country is, I don't want to say fractured, but we are fragmented in terms of our political views. And so, I got back to what we talked about at the very outset of this conversation, and that is, is Confederation working for all regions as effectively as it could?
Royce, I put that.
Is the country fractured? It's either votes or seats. In this election campaign, I think 86% went to either the Liberal Party or the Conservative Party. It's kind of too bad because it's a minority government that then privileges the small parties, the NDP and the Bloc. They can actually decide whether or not the government lives on or if it's defeated. But, Canada is looking more and more like a two-party system, the kind of two-party system we have here in Manitoba, they have in the United Kingdom, in Australia. In terms of being fragmented, the country is actually maybe less fragmented now than it has been in a while. And so those sorts of divisions might make themselves, they might kind of blow up in the next few years, or we might continue on back to a kind of two-party national politics.
So here's my problem. And being the political science professor, you need to explain this to me. So the maritime provinces have about 2.5 million people that live there. They have 32 federal seats. Alberta has almost 4.5 million people living there. They only have 37 federal seats. When are we going to change all this? When's this going to change? Because that, to me, the proportion, the way we do this is it's wrong. It's not reflective of our country.
One of the principles that this country was founded on was representation by population.
Yep. It's very unfair, and it's becoming a crisis over time. In the last redistribution, Quebec was actually supposed to lose a seat, and the Justin Trudeau's government rushed into action and ensured that wouldn't happen. They changed the rules. I can't remember the date, but they changed the rules such that no province can go down in seats after a certain redistribution. I think the 2012 one, explicitly to help Quebec. And, these sorts of rules have benefited enormously parts of the country where population is declining. They're becoming less important. Not to be insulting, just kind of, this is what happens in the life of a country. They hold onto their seats, Quebec, the Maritimes, and the regions that are discriminated against are Alberta, British Columbia, kind of Ontario. So this is something to be upset about. It also applies to the Senate. The Maritimes get way too many senators compared to the rest of Canada. It's unfair. It's something that should definitely be fixed. But no one wants to offend Quebec. There's so many seats in Quebec. That's the MO of all our major parties, and that makes it hard to address.
They should just blow up the Senate. It's like it seems that you have to be an ex-media person to get in there anyways. It's just blow it up. It is just ridiculous. It's such a waste of money, such a waste of time. You could rent that space out in Parliament Hill and make some money. Like, I mean, it's just unnecessary. Anyways, I saw, and I won't say what senator it was on the news, former TV anchor, that's all I'll say. And wearing, probably a $30,000 necklace or $20,000 necklace. And I thought, well, aren't we just sending the right message? Because what is it that you do for the country? Sorry, I'm going to get off on a tangent. I don't want to do that. I want to wrap up with
Aren't
this.
you aren't you aren't you from Alberta? Albertans are all Senate reformers.
Well, no. We want to do elect our own Senate, right? If you're going to do it,
Yeah,
let's
yeah.
elect your own Senate. But nobody seems to want to respect that because it would offend Quebec. And goodness
Okay,
gracious,
well, but
don't want to
yeah,
do that.
and I know you wanted to wrap this up, and we can have a longer conversation about this at another time. What's the advantage of having an elected parliament and an elected Senate?
Yeah,
Aren't you just kind of doubling up?
I agree. I don't think you need to have them at all. It's just nonsense.
Yeah, so yeah, we can have a conversation at some
Yeah.
point about what the role of the Senate could be, ideally, should be
Yeah.
theoretically, could be ideally.
Never will be.
Never will be. Yeah.
Never will be.
You,
So
you think we should be renting out the space for weddings and banquets and that sort of thing?
absolutely. Could you think of the money you would make for weddings and stuff like that? That would be fan. Like, let's actually get some work done there. Have some weddings. You could have a banquet hall. Wow, it would be awesome. I do want to wrap up on this. We're seeing a lot of stuff online, and we're seeing some reports now of people concerned with ballots, with people concerned with what went on at some polling stations. Royce, is there any, what do you think of this, first of all? It seems to me it was very American, right? Oh, the election was rigged and all this kind of stuff. But I'm seeing a
Yeah.
lot of it. Have you looked into this yet?
Only in media reports. My response is that if you've got five or six or seven anecdotes of something happening, well, millions of people voted in the election campaign. In our election, there's always going to be errors. There's always going to be mistakes. You cannot chalk this up to fraud or to voter suppression, without more serious evidence. Elections Canada, they provide opportunities for people to complain. It's concerning. It's definitely concerning. Apparently there was someone that went and his name was already crossed off and there was an error. That's concerning. It has to be dealt with, but it's inevitable that we see errors. And from what I've seen, it's not something to worry about. Canada's elections are very, very reliable, especially compared to other countries.
Yeah, I think the reports that I've seen and some of the reports that have come to me suggest that there are some minor irregularities, but not what you would consider to be widespread fraud.
Okay, and
I'm
final.
not saying you ignore them, right? I don't mean to
Yeah.
be dismissive of these things.
No,
I
no.
think that I agree with Royce that we have to take these things seriously and make sure that Canadians have confidence in the integrity of the electoral process.
Gentlemen, thank you very much. I think we have some interesting times ahead of us. We have much more to talk about again next week because we will circle back after Mark Carney, our Prime Minister, has an opportunity to sit with Donald Trump. I'm excited to watch and see if they do the media scrum themselves, in the chair and see how that goes. But I think there's a lot of other things we can expect in the short amount of time that will define not only Mark Carney's Prime Minister tenure or his path, but hopefully we can bring the West and Canada back together and start having that discussion. So lots to talk about. So thank you very much for your time. Look forward to reading your columns in the Winnipeg Sun. You can read their columns, by the way, by going to the winnipegsun.com. And if you don't mind, please like and share this video and make sure you follow our YouTube page. Have a good afternoon, guys.
Thanks for watching Inside Politics with Kevin Klein. Please like and subscribe to this channel and visit thewinnipegsun.com for more.